Disclaimer. The apartment was quiet the way Tuesday evenings usually were. Daphne moved through her living room, straightening cushions, stacking folders, doing the small things that made a space feel like hers. Her boss, Flavio Russo, had stopped by an hour ago with contracts she needed for the morning meeting. Italian, old money, the kind of man who could silence a boardroom just by walking into it. He was in the bathroom. She could hear the faucet running. Normal, routine, safe, and quiet. Then the front door flew open. Scott Lawson stumbled in like he had every right to be there. Her ex. 8 months of restraining orders, court dates, and rebuilding her life, and here he was, dress shirt half unbuttoned, eyes glassy, moving with the particular look in his eyes she remembered too clearly. He was slow and dangerous at the same time. "You think this is a life, Daphne?" He stepped closer. "This little apartment, this little job? You really think you walked away from me and landed somewhere better?" Daphne backed up. Her shoulders hit the wall. His hand closed around her neck before she could say a word. "A restraining order," he almost laughed, "like a piece of paper was going to stop me from seeing you." She grabbed at his wrist. Her vision started pulling at the edges. Then she heard the bathroom door open. Scott didn't hear it. He was still talking, still squeezing, still looking at her like she was something he owned and had every right to break. Flavio stepped into the hallway. He took in the scene, Daphne against the wall, Scott's hand at her neck, and he moved. No warning, no words. He crossed the room, grabbed Scott by the collar, and yanked him back so hard Scott's feet nearly left the floor. Daphne slid down the wall, gasping. Stay with me, friends. Let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The morning after. The police left at midnight. Daphne sat on her couch with a bag of ice against her neck and listened to the sound of her apartment. The clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the city outside doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, unbothered by what had just happened inside her home. Flavio came back in from the hallway and closed the front door behind him. He didn't say anything to her, partly because he didn't know what to say. He just walked to the armchair across from her and sat down. Jacket still on. Posture straight. Like a man who had decided something and didn't need to announce it. She should have told him he could leave. That she was fine. That she had handled worse. She didn't say any of that because that would be a big lie. So instead, she sat there with the ice against her neck and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Scott's voice was still in her head. The weight of his hand was still on her skin. 8 months of restraining orders and court dates and rebuilding herself from the floor up, and he had walked through her front door like none of it meant anything. Like she still belonged to him. Flavio got up without a word and went to the kitchen. She was waiting for him to say something to her. Maybe ask her how long it's been happening, or maybe ask about Scott. But he didn't, and she was so glad he didn't. She was so embarrassed that she felt the ground should open up and swallow her. She heard the tap run, the kettle fill, the quiet sounds of someone making themselves useful instead of making a speech about what he witnessed. A few minutes later, he came back and set a mug of tea on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. The warmth moved up through her fingers, and she held on to it like it was the only solid thing in the room. Around 2 a.m, he finally reached for his jacket and stood, and something in Daphne's chest tightened in a way she didn't expect. "Mr. Russo." He stopped. She hadn't planned the words. They came out before she could decide whether to say them. "Thank you for tonight. If you weren't here tonight, I don't know what would have happened. He probably might have killed me," she said quietly. The room went very still. He turned around and looked at her, not with pity, not with the uncomfortable expression people wore when they didn't know what to do with someone else's pain. Then he took his jacket off. He walked back to the armchair and sat down. No explanation, no speech. He just sat back down. And somehow that was the most powerful thing anyone had done for her in years. Daphne felt something shift behind her eyes. She pulled her knees to her chest and looked down at her mug and breathed. She was not going to fall apart in front of her boss. She was not going to do that. She held herself together. And then her phone rang. Her mother. Daphne stared at the screen for one full second. 1 second where she let herself hope. Maybe she heard. Maybe someone called her. Maybe this time... Daphne. Her mother's voice was already tight. What the hell happened with Scott? He put my hands around my neck, Mom. He said you've been provoking him, telling lies about him. Daphne went very still. Why would I do that? There's a reason I have a restraining order against him. I want nothing to do with him. You know how he gets when he feels disrespected. What did you expect, Daphne? You keep pushing that man, and then you act surprised when... She hung up. She sat there with the phone in her hand and the room so quiet she could hear a pin drop. Her mother had just called her, not to ask if she was breathing, not to ask if she was hurt, but to tell her she had brought it on herself. Shame on her for expecting something different from her mother. She set the phone face down on the cushion. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion, underneath the hurt, something harder was forming. Something that had been forming all these months. Something that was finally starting to have edges. She wasn't going to spend the rest of her life making herself small enough for people who had already decided she didn't matter. Not anymore. Flavio hadn't moved. He was watching her from the armchair. No pity, no awkwardness, just presence. His shirt was rumpled. There was a bruise forming along his knuckles that she hadn't noticed before. He had sat in her apartment for hours without checking his phone once. You don't have to stay, Mr. Russo, she said. I'm aware, but I want to, Daphne. Humor me. He didn't move. Why do you want to stay, sir? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that meant he didn't have an answer, the kind that meant he was choosing his words carefully. Call me crazy, but I don't think you should be alone tonight. No performance, no grand gesture, just the truth said plainly by a man who had already proved he meant it. Daphne looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back down at her mug. Outside, New York kept moving. Inside, everything was still. The tea had gone cold. The ice had melted. Somewhere across the city, Scott Lawson was sitting in a police station, already on the phone with his lawyer. But in this room, in this chair across from her, Flavio Russo was still there. She didn't know what to do with that yet, so she just sat with it. And for tonight, it was enough. Chapter 2. The Shift. Nobody said anything about the coffee. It appeared on her desk on a Monday morning, a cup from her favorite coffee place 2 blocks from the office. There was no note underneath it, but she knew it was for Mr. Russo. Daphne stood at her desk for a long moment staring at it. Then she sat down, pulled the cup toward her, and got to work. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. But it happened again on Wednesday and on Friday. The second week, a car was waiting outside the building when she finished the late night of filing. She came downstairs at 9:45 and there was a black car at the curb with her name on it. The driver explained who sent it so she'd be comfortable and go with him. She told herself it was a practical arrangement. Her boss worked late, she worked late. It made sense for the company to have her home safely. And that was all it was. She almost believed it. The third week, Flavio called her into his office and told her she was being moved from personal assistant to chief of staff, effective immediately. Same office, same building, entirely different weight to the title. The kind of title that meant something in a room full of people who had spent years deciding she didn't. You've earned it, he said, in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over and wouldn't listen to whatever she wanted to say. She walked back to her desk and sat down and stared at her screen for a full minute before she could make her hands move. Life outside the office was quieter in ways she was still getting used to. Scott's arrest had been held. The restraining order was still in place. She had stopped checking over her shoulder every time she stepped outside. At least, she was trying to. Old habits from 2 years of walking on eggshells around him didn't disappear overnight. But she was sleeping better. That was something. And then the letter arrived. It came through her lawyer on a Thursday afternoon. Scott's legal team was filing a motion to have the restraining order lifted. Insufficient grounds, the letter said. Lack of continued threat. His lawyer had used words like misunderstanding and isolated incident, and Daphne had read those words and felt something cold move through her chest. She read the letter numerous times. Each pass through it landed differently. First the shock, then the anger, then something quieter and more familiar that she didn't want to name. The feeling of being told again that what happened to her wasn't serious enough. That the night Scott's hand closed around her neck in her own apartment was something that could be reframed, minimized, argued away by a man in a good suit who got paid to make her experience sound like a misunderstanding. She set the letter down and looked at her hands. She felt a headache coming on. She had done everything right. Every single thing. She had shown up to every court date alone, without anyone sitting beside her, while Scott arrived with 2 lawyers and his uncle who knew somebody who knew somebody. She had documented the calls, the texts, the voice messages he left at odd hours in the morning that started soft and turned into something else. She had a witness, the most credible witness imaginable, and she had done everything right. And Scott Lawson was still trying to take the one legal protection she had away from her. She called her lawyer back within the hour. Her lawyer told her not to worry, that these motions were common, that they would respond. Daphne hung up and sat very still at her desk. She opened her laptop and started drafting notes to send to her lawyer. Everything she could remember, every date, every incident, every detail she had been carrying in her body. She typed for 2 hours without stopping. When she finally closed the laptop, her jaw ached from holding it tight the whole time. 2 days later, her lawyer called her back. The motion was withdrawn, she said. Daphne frowned. Withdrawn? By who? By Scott's legal team. They filed to withdraw it yesterday morning. No explanation given. Daphne sat with that for a moment. That doesn't just happen, right? No, her lawyer agreed. It doesn't. She hung up and stared at the wall. It couldn't be him, right? She thought about Mr. Russo, about the way he had handled the police that night without raising his voice once, about the bruise on his knuckles that he had never mentioned and she had never asked about. She thought about all of it. She couldn't bring herself, didn't ask how. Some things you just let be. Chapter 3. What he sees. The dress was simple, black, fitted, nothing that asked for attention. Daphne had stood in front of her mirror for 20 minutes telling herself that was exactly the point. You are going as his chief of staff. This is a business dinner. You are there to work. She believed about half of it. The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting was low and everything on the menu was described in 2 words or fewer. The kind of place where old money sat across from even older money and everybody already knew each other's names before they walked in. Daphne had been in rooms like this before, filing documents in the back, arranging seat cards, making sure the right people had the right drinks. She had never walked into one as the right hand of the man everyone was already watching. Flavio arrived at her side as she stepped through the entrance and she felt the room register them together. Not loudly, just a small shift that happens when people recalibrate who matters. She kept her chin up. The dinner moved the way these things did. Courses arriving quietly, conversations sliding between business and pleasantry. Everyone performing a version of themselves they had rehearsed. Flavio introduced her by her full title and didn't explain it further. Chief of Staff. He said it the way you say something that requires no justification. And people responded accordingly. By the second course, she had answered 3 questions directly that had been aimed past her at him. The men at the table had that particular habit, addressing the answer to him even when she was the one who had just spoken. She caught it each time, redirected smoothly, kept her voice level. The third time it happened, she watched Flavio lean back slightly in his chair and say nothing, leaving the space entirely to her, making it clear to everyone at the table exactly who he expected them to be speaking to. She felt that more than she showed. By the third course, she had redirected a conversation that was heading somewhere unproductive, and watched the table follow her lead without realizing they were doing it. A man named Gerard, silver hair, Swiss watch, the particular confidence of someone who had seen a lot of stuff and came up on top, leaned across the table and told her she had a sharp mind. She thanked him, moved on, didn't let herself sit in it, but she felt it. What she didn't let herself feel, not then, not at the table, was Flavio's attention. He spoke when he needed to and let her lead when she was leading, and at no point in the entire evening did he step in front of her. She had seen men who did that constantly, who couldn't resist taking back control the moment a room started responding to someone else. He never once did it. She noticed. She filed it away. She kept working. The car ride home was quiet. The city moved past the windows in streaks of gold and white. Daphne sat with her hands in her lap and let herself breathe for the first time since they had walked in. She had done it. She had sat at that table and held her own, and nobody had made her feel like she didn't belong there. Almost nobody. She had caught herself twice. Once when she reached for the wrong glass and pulled back before anyone noticed, and the other when Gerard's colleague had talked over her mid-sentence, and she stopped instead of finishing. Small things. The kind of thing you only noticed if you were watching yourself from the outside. Flavio had noticed. He didn't say anything until they were driving home and were 2 blocks from her apartment. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She turned to look at him. "In all my years of business dinners, I have never seen anyone apologize for being in a room the way you do." Daphne went still. "I don't apologize," she said. "Not with words," he said, "with everything else." She didn't have a response to that. She looked back out the window and felt the truth of it sitting in her chest, uncomfortable and accurate. "You held that table tonight. Every person in that room adjusted to you at some point. Gerard's colleague, I don't even remember his name, talked over you, and you said nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Russo, stop apologizing for taking up space, Daphne." He said it simply. No lecture, no follow-up, just a statement, clean and direct, dropped into the silence between them. The car stopped in front of her building. She gathered her bag, reached for the door handle, paused. "I will. Good night, Mr. Russo," she said. "I'm rooting for you, Daphne." She stepped out onto the pavement and walked to her front door. She could feel the car still at the curb behind her. She didn't turn around. She found her keys, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. And then, just before the door closed, she glanced back. The car was still there. He was still watching. Not obviously, not in a way she could call out or question. Just a man making sure she got inside safely before he drove away. The door clicked shut behind her. She stood in her hallway in her black dress with her keys in her hand and her heart doing something she didn't have a name for yet. What he said kept on replaying in her head until she slept off. I have to stop here for a second, my dear viewers. That car scene just did something to me. He saw every moment of that dinner, every time she pulled back, every time she stopped herself, and he waited until they were alone to tell her the truth that she held that room and just didn't let herself see it, that she needs to stop apologizing for taking up space. Subscribe and turn on notifications to your viewers, because this story shifts hard from here. Drop a comment below. Are you feeling Flavio right now? Keep watching. Chapter 4. The Foundation. It was the first time he had suggested lunch. Not a working lunch. Not a briefing over sandwiches at her desk. An actual restaurant. A corner table. Menus they both looked at without rushing. She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she did what she always did. She kept it professional, kept the conversation on the quarterly review, kept herself on the right side of whatever line she had been carefully not crossing for months. He let her do that for about 10 minutes. Then he put his menu down and looked at her and talked about what he was thinking about. "What do you actually want to do, Daphne?" he said. She looked up. "I'm sorry? You don't seem like you are happy with this job." A lot of people would be over the moon with this promotion, but not you. Of course not, sir. I appreciate all you have done for me, she replied instantly, but he was smiling. I'm not upset, Daphne, but I'm also not blind. You are good at your job, but you aren't happy. Hence the question, what did you want to do before all of this? She opened her mouth and closed it again. Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. She looked down at her water glass for a moment. Then she told him. She had wanted to be a therapist. Specifically, she had wanted to work with women in domestic violence situations, the ones who were still inside it, who couldn't see the door yet, who needed someone to sit across from them and tell them that what was happening to them had a name, and that name was not their fault. She had gone to school for it. She had the coursework, the hours, the supervisor who had told her she had a natural instinct for it. And then she had ended up inside the exact situation she had trained to help people escape. She said that last part quietly, without drama, just the fact of it sitting on the table between them. So I stopped, she said. I couldn't exactly sit across from a woman in that situation and tell her I understood when I was going home to the same thing every night. It felt dishonest. It felt, I don't know, like I had failed at the one thing I was supposed to be good at. Flavio was quiet for a moment. Open a foundation then, he said. She blinked. What are you talking about, sir? A foundation. Supporting women coming out of abusive relationships, legal fees, housing, counseling, the things nobody talks about when they tell you to just leave. She shook her head slowly. That's not the same thing as... It's exactly the same thing, he said. It's the same calling through a different door. You spent years learning how to help women in that situation. You then lived it yourself. There is nobody more qualified to build something that actually works. I'm a chief of staff. I run your office. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know everything about running a foundation. A foundation is a fundraiser with a mission statement. You already know how to do this. Don't sell yourself short, Daphne. She looked at him. You shouldn't feel ashamed of what happened to you, he said, more quietly. It doesn't disqualify you. If anything, it means you understand something that most people who work in this space never will. The restaurant noise continued around them. Glasses clinking, conversation at other tables. Daphne sat with his words and felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way something shifts when a door you forgot existed opens a crack and light comes through. I will think about it, sir. Thank you. She drove home with his words still sitting with her. She had heard versions of that before, from professors, from people who meant well. The difference was, Flavio had said it like it was already decided, like he was simply waiting for her to catch up. Her apartment was quiet. She made tea she didn't drink. Then she went to the closet. The box was on the top shelf behind her winter coats. She hadn't touched it in years. Printed research underneath. Highlighted, annotated, the work of someone who had a plan. And at the very bottom, folded twice, a piece of paper she recognized before she even opened it. Goals, second year of grad school, numbered, specific, the handwriting of a woman who had not yet learned to make herself small. She had not lost this, she had just put it somewhere she couldn't see it. She got up, set the paper on her desk where she would have to look at it, and opened her laptop. She sent him a message. She was done thinking about it and would like to take up his offer. By Monday, the funds were in the account she had set up the night before, still half asleep, still not fully believing it would happen that fast. She stared at the number for a long time, sent him a message thanking him, then she got to work. The weeks that followed were the fullest she had felt in years. She was running his office during the day and building the foundation in every hour that was left. Late nights at her desk, early mornings on calls with lawyers and social workers and women's shelters. She forgot to eat sometimes. She didn't forget once why she was doing it. One afternoon, she was deep inside a grant application, 3 tabs open, notes spread across her desk, headphones in, completely gone from the world around her, when her phone rang. Her sister. She answered, "Does Scott know about this foundation? Because he's going to think you're doing this to embarrass him. You know how he..." "Goodbye," Daphne said. She hung up. She sat there with the city dark outside her window and felt the familiar weight of it. The family that chose his money over her safety and was still somehow calling to manage his feelings. She looked at her phone for a long moment. Then she scrolled to his name and pressed call. She needed to talk to someone on her side. It rang once. Daphne. His voice was steady, present. She exhaled. My family just called. They want to know if Scott knows about the foundation. A pause. And what did you tell them? I hung up, she said. She could hear the quiet on his end. Good, he said simply. She leaned back in her chair and looked up at the ceiling and let herself breathe. He stayed on the line. She didn't ask him to. He just did. And they chatted. Chapter 5. Almost. Tomorrow was the event. Daphne had been preparing for 3 months, and she was still on her living room floor at 9 in the evening, surrounded by printed schedules. Flavio arrived with the annotated program and a paper bag from the Italian place she liked. She hadn't eaten since noon. He seemed to know. They sat at her dining table and worked through it section by section. The welcome remarks, the speaker order, the moment of silence she had built in for survivors who couldn't be in the room. He read that part and said, "Leave it exactly as it is." She wrote nothing next to it. They were halfway through the second pass when she paused on a paragraph she had written about why the foundation existed. She had kept it vague on purpose, professional, measured, the kind of language that looked good in a press release. She stared at it. And then, without planning it, without deciding to, she started talking. She told him that Scott was sweet at the beginning, genuinely sweet, the kind of man who remembered how she took her coffee and showed up with flowers for no reason and made her feel, for the first time in a long time, like she was someone worth showing up for. Then one night, he hit her. She said it plainly, no dramatics, just the fact of it. He cried after, told her it would never happen again, told her he didn't know what came over him. And she believed him because she wanted to, and because nobody had told her yet that that moment, the apology, the tears, the promises, was not the exception. It was the pattern. It happened again, and again. Each time followed by the same sweetness that had made her fall for him in the first place, until the sweetness stopped coming and there was just the other thing. And by then she had spent so long making herself small and quiet and careful that she had almost forgotten she was allowed to take up space at all. She stopped talking. The apartment was very quiet. Flavio hadn't moved. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not pity, not discomfort, something steadier than both. I really appreciate you everything, Mr. Russo, for not asking and waiting till I was ready before talking about it, he said. Something in his tone made her go still. Call me Flavio. She blinked. He held her gaze. You don't need to call me Mr. Russo anymore. And besides, you don't work for me anymore. She didn't say anything. She looked down at the table for a moment and then back at him. Flavio, she said, testing it, the word unfamiliar in her mouth. He nodded once, like it was settled. They went back to the program, but something in the room had shifted and they both knew it. By 9:30, they had been through everything twice. The table was covered in paper and the food was gone. Daphne reached across to pull the last page toward her, and a strand of hair fell loose from her ponytail across her face. She didn't notice. She was already reading. Flavio reached over and moved it back. Not slowly, not deliberately, the way you do something without deciding to first. His fingers barely grazed her temple. They both went still. 1 second, then he pulled his hand back and looked at the table, and she set the page down and they found things to do with their hands. Everything looks good, he said. Yes, she said. He stood, put on his jackets, and she walked him to the door. He said good night, except he didn't leave. He stopped with his hand on the door and turned and looked at her, the way a man looks at a woman when he has been trying not to and has run out of reasons. She looked back. Everything that had been building for months sat right there between them, present, undeniable. He didn't name it. She didn't ask him to. A decision made, or maybe delayed, he turned back to the door. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow is yours." He left. Daphne stood in her hallway with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. She had called him by his name, and somewhere in the quiet of her apartment, the woman who had spent 2 years being told she was the problem finally felt like someone worth choosing. Not out of pity, not out of obligation. Chapter 6: The Event and the Shadow. The venue was everything she had written on a napkin and refused to let herself believe was possible. An hall that could seat 400 people, every one of the chairs filled. Women in their best dresses sitting next to lawyers and social workers and donors who had written checks because Flavio Russo had called them personally and told them exactly why this mattered. The lighting was warm. The flowers were white. At the back of the room, a display board showed the foundation's name in letters she had chosen herself. She stood behind the curtain and breathed. Flavio appeared at her side. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat coming from him. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. She looked out at the room. "I think I am. It's now or never," she said. She walked out. The room settled when she stepped to the podium. Shoulders back, sleek high ponytail, the deep brown skin that had been in that bathroom mirror this morning telling herself she was ready. She was ready. "Some months ago," she began, "I sat in a police station filling out a report that I wasn't sure anyone would take seriously. I had done everything right. I had the documentation. I had the evidence. And I still walked out of that building feeling like the problem." The room was completely still. Tonight is for every woman who has ever been made to feel like the problem. Every woman who did everything right and still couldn't find the door. This foundation exists because you deserve more than survival. You deserve a life that belongs entirely to you. The applause started before she finished the sentence. She let it wash over her. She didn't shrink from it. She stood at that podium and took up every inch of the space she had spent years apologizing for, and she let herself feel it. All of it. The months of work, the court dates, the phone calls from family members who chose his side, the nights she ate alone and rebuilt herself from scratch. All of it had led here. She moved through the acknowledgments, the organizing team, the volunteers, the partner organizations, and then she reached the donors. I want to take a moment to recognize the generosity that made tonight possible. Many of you gave publicly, and we are so grateful. But I also want to acknowledge an anonymous contributor whose gift covered the single largest line item of this entire event. She smiled out at the room. "Whoever you are, thank you." The audience applauded. She moved on. She didn't see the man standing at the back of the room. He was positioned just inside the rear entrance, half in shadow, dressed well enough to belong, and quietly enough that nobody had looked twice. He had arrived after the program started and taken a spot where he could see the stage clearly without being seen himself. Scott Lawson watched Daphne Clayton stand at that podium and speak to the crowd like she had been doing it her whole life. He watched the room respond to her, watched the applause, watched the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin up. That was the thing about Daphne that Scott had never been able to stand. The more she became herself, the smaller it made him feel, and the more he had needed to cut her back down to size. He had spent 2 years doing exactly that, chipping away at the edges of her. The comments about her weight, her clothes, her voice, the way she laughed too loud in rooms where she should have been quieter. He had been patient and consistent, and by the end, she had been so worn down she had started finishing his sentences for him, apologizing before he even opened his mouth, making herself small before he had to ask. He had liked her best like that. And then she left, and got the order and found that job and found him. Scott's jaw tightened slightly at the thought of Flavio Russo standing backstage with her. He had done his research. Old Italian money, serious connections, the kind of man whose phone calls got answered on the first ring by people who mattered. He was a complication Scott hadn't anticipated. But complications were manageable. Everything was manageable when you were patient and rich enough. He had watched her build this foundation for months. Every step, every donor meeting, every late night in her office. He had known about the event weeks before the invitations went out. And 6 weeks ago, through 3 layers of shell accounts that would never trace back to him, he had written the check she had just thanked a room full of people for. He was already inside. She had thanked him. She smiled when she said it. That was the part he kept coming back to, the smile. Daphne, standing at her podium, glowing, powerful, everything she had built surrounding her, and thanking him for it without knowing it. There was a poem that he found deeply satisfying. He wasn't done. He had never been done. The arrest, the restraining order, the months of silence, none of that was defeat. That was strategy. You didn't chase a woman like Daphne. You waited, you repositioned, you found the door she left open without realizing it, and you walked through it quietly, on your own terms, when she was looking the other way. She thought she had built walls. She thought she was safe. She thought the man who almost broke her was sitting in his apartment somewhere, defeated, finished, gone from her life for good. She was wrong. I will be seeing you soon, Daphne. Across the room, Flavio caught her eye as she stepped off the stage and held her gaze for a moment, something warm and private passing between them that the rest of the room couldn't read. She smiled. He smiled back. Neither of them noticed the man slipping out the rear exit. The door closed quietly behind him. Scott Lawson walked out into the New York night and pulled out his phone. He had work to do. The end. Okay, I need a moment because that ending just did something to me. She stood at that podium and she was magnificent. That should have been the whole story. Except Scott was in the back of the room the entire time. He is not gone from her life. He's just different now. Quieter, more calculated, already inside everything she built. Flavio is in this story and I love him for her, but I need you to understand that this story is nowhere near finished. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications because part 2 is coming, and I promise you it does not start slow. And drop a comment below. Did you see that ending coming? Because I need to know I was not the only one who didn't. Leave a comment below. Tell me how you are feeling right now because this ending deserves a conversation.